So good evening, everybody. And on the behalf of Park Street Church and on the behalf of the planning team, I'd like to welcome you to the first ever Justice Day. My name is David Alvarez. I am the team lead to Justice Day Boston. And the team's excited. We've been planning this for about 11 months. There's been a lot of changes along the way, a lot of hurdles we've overcome. We've even made changes within the last couple of days, I believe. So lots of different things that we came across. So my role tonight is to introduce the conference, and what I'm going to do that in way of story. And my hope is that as you listen to the themes and topics of the story, that you may gravitate to some part of that of the themes and topics, because in the themes and topics, it's where you're going to hear the conference unfold. Okay. So, Boston is well known for its hospitals. It's well known for its schools. Like the colleges of the Fenway, Boston College, Boston University, and there's some of the smaller ones like Harvard University and MIT. But let's be honest. You can't come across Boston unless you come into contact with Harvard in some way. There's a strong presence at the conference. A lot of our speakers have gone to Harvard. That wasn't planned that way. But also, I have to give a shout out to Gordon Conwell, because they have a strong presence this weekend as well. They have a Boston campus for Masters of Divinity and other programs. But Boston is really rich in its history, and as a Boston native, I'm kind of I'm very proud of the city, and we're rich in history, and I like to say that Boston's a city of firsts, right? So I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm going to claim the chocolate chip cookie because it was actually created in the Boston-ish area. But that we also had public schools. Was actually first started. The first public schools in all of the U.S. were started here in Boston, and there's a couple of things I can't seem to remember right now. But we also had the first training of teachers out in Framingham, it's Massachusetts, but I'm still going to claim it for Boston. But not to be undone, Boston was actually played a huge role in the abolitionist movement back during the Civil War. And you may recall, well, not recall, but if you get a chance to walk around the Common, there's different plaques. But right across the State House, what you'll see is you'll see a plaque for the 54th Regiment. Back in the Civil War. But that 54th Regiment was actually the first volunteer all-African-American regiment, the first one from all the country. So again, it's rich in its history. But I also have some of my own stories. Being a Boston, native to Boston and raised here, whether it's going to my first Red Sox game right behind the dugout, or perhaps it's, having my first pet out of the MSPCA in Jamaica Plain, going to Museum of Fine Arts, and maybe one of my favorite contemplative spots over by Castle Island, down off of the Red Line. But what I want to share with you is a story from my childhood, where it was a Mother's Day, and all the cousins got together, of course, with the uncles as well, to celebrate our aunts and our moms. But as young kids do, myself and two other cousins, we snuck out. We snuck out during the barbecue and went to go play in the schoolyard. And this story for me is unforgettable, because at some point we were, my two cousins and I in the schoolyard, we were surrounded by a gang of 20. And at one point, one of the gang members brought out a gun. And as I recall the emotions and the feelings, it was, again, very clear in my mind, because at one point the barrel was pointed at my head. And by God's grace, all three of us were able to come out of that scenario. But my mom remembers it a little bit different, as she had to take me to the hospital because my head wouldn't stop bleeding, and I needed to get a few stitches. But as I process that time right now, what I understand is that there were two victims that day. There was my cousins and myself, since we were attacked, of course. And then there were what I would say, it was the gang members themselves. The gang members believe that violence is power. And it's just the wrong mentality. This affects our neighborhoods, it affects our communities, it affects our schools, And unfortunately, I learned the hard way that it actually does affect our families. But as far as history is concerned as well, Boston had what was called a 10-point coalition. And at that, I think around the same time, maybe a few years after, a lot of the churches in the area in Boston were kind of fed up with the violence that was happening. And so they banded together, the churches banded together, and they worked alongside the police. They worked alongside other churches, community leaders, and they worked alongside gang members because they believed that to be a part of a solution, that everyone, all the stakeholders that lived in the community needed to be involved as part of the solution. That's a 10-point coalition if you wanted to look it up at a later time. But it was the first of its own, and then it got replicated in other cities around the United States. But it's a good image of what we think of. When we think of Jeremiah 29:7, most people think of it 29:11, but 29:7 says, wherever you live, go to the ballpark, go to the theater, but wherever you live, go and take care of the welfare of the city, because in it, when you take care of the welfare of the city, you're giving yourself your shalom. You're looking out for your own shalom at the same time. And I think that model of the 10-point coalition is a reflection of that. I had the privilege of working serving alongside War Relief. And actually, before I go on, I should have mentioned, so the National Conference, the National Justice Conference meets yearly, and they bring in organizations from around the world. They bring organizations, speakers from around the world as well, to come in and talk and give sessions, speaking sessions. But they also have a full day of breakout sessions, going over different topics like anti-trafficking and such. The Justice Conference is sponsored by War Relief. War Relief is a humanitarian organization that does work around the world, but they also mobilize the church to do service here in the U.S., but also outside the U.S. And just as a tidbit, War Relief actually started right here at Park Street Church. I attended the national conference in June, and as I kept meeting staffers and interns, and they kept hearing that I was from Park Street, and like, oh, you're from the mother church. And I'm like, oh, goodness. It was a little awkward a few times. But yeah, it did start here as a group of 200 people praying about what can they do to help relief during World War II. And it became into a more national type of organization. So I worked alongside War Relief. I went to Cambodia and I went to Indonesia. And the Cambodia trip in particular was very meaningful for me. It was impactful. I had the privilege of going into the villages there and working with some kids, seeing what War Relief was doing there. And I remember, the kids are running around. They're being kids. They're playing tag. They're playing hide and go seek. They're laughing. They're enjoying themselves. But some of them didn't have shirts. And a lot of them didn't have shoes. And as I was flying back home after my 2-week experience of serving there with War Relief, I flew into LA after the 2 weeks, got my first breakfast at LA, and it cost me about $12. And I had a hard time with this breakfast because I remembered with this $12, I could really feed a family of 4 for 3 days. As we were given that information while we were there, we visited some factories, heard what type of money they were making at the factories. Not a lot. I think it was maybe $28 a month these factory workers were making. That's US dollars, of course. But I had a hard time with that fact that here I am having a $12 breakfast, but I could be serving a whole entire family for a few days. And so my response to that was, for Friday nights, to not eat dinner for Friday nights and hand over the funds for that over to War Relief. And at Lent time, I would fast for the whole entire Friday. And all that money would go to War Relief, so to remember what I saw and to remember what I experienced. And also for myself in particular, I'm very particular about my water use because I realized that not everyone has access to clean water. So that was my experience with War Relief. And then 2 years ago, I went to International Justice Mission. They have a global prayer gathering that happens every year. And last couple of years ago was my first one. I went this year as well. But, so one of the things that they assigned me a prayer room to pray over Thailand. And I remember one of the first things that we were going to pray about in that room was Thai citizenship. And I asked myself, what does Thai citizenship have anything to do with justice? And So the country director was telling us what IJM was doing in Thailand, and at one point they put up a video for us to watch, and there was this video, an interview of this man. He had the biggest smile on his face, from cheek to cheek. This man is very. You wanted to smile along with him and laugh along with him because, see, his story was he was a Thai-born man, born to Thai-born parents, but he had his citizenship rejected for 12 years straight. But he was telling us a story with IJM. Finally, after 13 years, he said, "I got my Thai ID card, and now I can be a person again, just like everybody else." And he said it with such sincerity. But at that moment, I said to myself, forget the rest of this video. Let's just start praying about Thai citizenship. Because I realized and I understood something in my gut level that he was saying. I actually had to do a paper on human trafficking. One of the reasons why I went to the Justice Conference to begin with was because they have a whole track on human trafficking. But so as I was writing this paper, I had a course research, and I had to read the testimonies of many women who had been trafficked, basically, raped for profit. And just going to be honest, I cried for a few days because I didn't understand how is this ever happened? How does this ever happen, number one? How is it happening overseas? How is it happening in our back door, in our backyard right here in Boston? And it struck me because when you read the testimonies of these women over and over, they all say the same thing. I feel dead on the inside. And what really struck me the most with some of the testimonies were, I don't know how to dream. I don't know what that means. And that hit me because I don't know what it means for someone to say, I don't know what a dream is. And some of them would say, I don't know what it's like to make free decisions for myself. And whether it was these women who are trafficked or it was this man who said, I could be a person again. When someone says from a genuine place that they don't feel like they have a worth and value as a person, then you know that an injustice has occurred. And it doesn't matter if if it happens in our schoolyard, in our streets, in our campuses. It doesn't matter if it happens in hospitals or in a prison or a brothel. An injustice incurred is absolutely still an injustice incurred, and it demands a response by those of us who have a voice that can be a voice for the voiceless. That reminds me of World Relief's motto of the protection of the most vulnerable. And I challenge us, as I remember watching these kids running around playing fun and seeing how vulnerable they are. And a lot of women in our streets of Boston are vulnerable as well for their own economic reasons. It's very complicated. Who are the most vulnerable that we come into interaction every day? Whether we work in Kendall Square, the financial district, whether we live in Codman Square or Kenmore Square or Porter Square, who are the most vulnerable that we come across every day? So I'm going to leave us with a couple of positive notes. I'm a little over. So the only thing I'm going to say about the weekend is some of us are on fire about a particular issue. Some of us are just exploring what is justice and what does it mean for my discipleship. And I would encourage us to think through the lens of the heart of justice with God. Let that be our guiding lens as we move into the space. Last thing I'm going to say, as I wrote that paper on what does the Bible say about human trafficking, I saw something unique, interesting. In the Old Testament, when you see the wisdom literature, it talks about what wisdom looks like. Who is responsible? Citizens, those in high office. What is compassion, kindness? And when you take a look at there's actual laws in the Torah that says this is what you're supposed to do justice. And then there's the Old Testament, the prophets, right? Of course, they do warn against idolatry, but they also warn God's people about the injustice that they're doing themselves. And there's been plenty of done by the church, a lot of injustices, even in our reservations here in the United States. So. But and then I went into the New Testament, and the thing that was interesting to me was that you never see the word justice in the epistles. But when you read the Old Testament all at one time, as I did, and then jump into the New Testament, the language of justice is all over the New Testament. Whether it's the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, the Apostle John, love your enemy. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, if slaved or not slaved, or a believer or not, you all have intrinsic worth and value. This is all right relationship with one another, because we can have right relationship with God, righteousness, and then justice with one another. And then just a promise I'm going to leave you. It's actually in your booklets. Isaiah 42, 1-4 says this. But I have a servant, and I put my spirit upon him, and he's not going to sleep. He's not going to grow tired. He's not going to go be discouraged until justice is established for all people, for all nations, for all time. And this encourages me because of number one, because of the one who promised it is faithful. You know, at that IJM prayer gathering, I remember one of the country directors was like, we're sorry, we've filled the list of prayer requests, but everything we prayed about last year happened, so we don't want to leave anything off this time. He is faithful to accomplish his promises. And you know, the promise itself, church, can you imagine it? Peace, no more violence, that there are no more slaves around the world. And this is what he's promised. And you know, Jesus, he came, his public ministry was to teach, yes, but he spent time with the poor and the oppressed. The promise already started, and he engages us with that promise and that invitation to work alongside him. So to the one who is faithful and holy and humble, to him be all the honor, the glory, the majesty and power forever and ever. And the church said, amen. So I'd like to introduce Shin, who will be our MC for the rest of our time. Shin is coming from Connecticut. He's an artist.
Cambridge.
Well, Cambridge, but originally from Connecticut.
It's a long story.
It's a long story. He's got a very unique story himself. And also going to Gordon Conwell and going to High Rock. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Hi, I'm Shin. Oh, yeah. Give him a hand. Give him a big round of applause. That's awesome. I was really excited about that. I'm just going to raise this up. Okay, cool. Awesome. I'm Shin. I'm a local artist in Cambridge, Mass. The long story is I grew up in New Jersey, lived in New Haven for a while. I didn't go to Yale, okay? Just let's put it like that. And my story in justice, I think we have all different ranges of how we have engaged with justice. I think some people, like me, maybe, 9 years ago, it would have been nothing. It would have been just a very uncomfortable conversation. While today, it would be a very engaging conversation. It would be almost maybe as much or even more than David's enthusiasm. Sometimes, I think he took a lot of my fire, so I'm just gonna really water this down. But if this is your first time, or this is just an uncomfortable conversation, just be okay with being uncomfortable. Be okay with the guilt, maybe the shame, the fear, because the one thing that we all know is that Jesus walks with us, with the Holy Spirit, and we really do need to understand that that is one of the core tenets of how we walk as a light of God, because Jesus was there with us and all of that. And yeah, and then for us who are just veterans, who have gone through protests and walked with Dr. King or what have you, the gamut is large. I want you to hear or feel how Jesus is moving you through this time, through all of these great conversations, great talks, great interactions, and great sessions. I think there is a lot of information that can really bog people down or just make people super invigorated. So I want you to just see where God is leading you and how he's turning on your heart in the midst of this story of justice. And we do have this is the much lightest thing because we got social media